In most negotiations, the parties often concede something to get what they want. The Farc peace negotiation has conflicting points. Former President Alvaro Uribe has long said he is worried about impunity. Is it a fair deal? And if not, could it be sustainable? Marc Chernick is a professor of practice of conflict resolution and human rights at Georgetown University. He is also director of a joint program on conflict resolution between Georgetown and the University Los Andes in Colombia. Professor, thank you for joining us on America's Now.
Thank you. It's a pleasure to be here.
So what are the strengths and weaknesses of this peace agreement? Is there anything more that President Santos could have done to make it stronger?
I don't think so. I think the negotiations were such that they were realistic, they were hard, but they covered essential points of reforming elements in the country, such as investment in rural areas and rural development. It focused on drug trafficking. And then it had new elements, what you referred to, justice for those who committed crimes against humanity and war crimes. They've never been in a peace agreement before anywhere in the world. They have provisions for a truth commission, there's provisions for reparations, there's provisions for the transformation of the Farc from a armed insurgency to a political party, which just happened in the last few weeks. The fact that the Farc has been around since 1964 and it said it would never give up its arms. Here, they signed an agreement. In January, they were located in 26 camps. And this past May, in June, they handed in the last arm. There were so many arms, the United Nations, who were overseeing the verification, they are still taking the arms out of the mountains because it's a big process to take thousands of arms from the jungles and the mountains. But all are in the control of the United Nations, and almost the last arms are out of the mountains. That's an amazing phenomenon.
So what happens when President Santos leaves office? Could this peace deal be rescinded, or could it go away?
Well, that's the question. We don't know what's going to happen after the elections in 2018. We're hoping that all candidates will agree to abide by it. At this point, the Constitutional Court is studying the agreements and seeing what part of these agreements will be in the Constitution and what could be changed by the Congress. There's also an argument that these agreements have the status of an international agreement. They were deposited in Switzerland, and under the provisions of what's called international humanitarian law, these are the equivalent of an international treaty and therefore cannot be easily changed. But we will see. Politics could change, and it's possible that a candidate that's not in favor of these accords could come in and could do damage or simply ignore them, which is, unfortunately, if you know the comparative history of peace processes, it's very hard to get to peace. They got to peace here, but then half of all accords fail in the implementation. So it means sustained commitment, and that's going to mean commitment from the president, whoever the new president will be, whoever the new Congress will be, and society is going to have to embrace this. So this is a tall order. It's not unusual in a post-conflict situation, but that's where we are in Colombia.
Well, let's talk about some of these skeptics. Even the former president, Alvaro Uribe, has called this peace with impunity. What do you say to that?
No, it's not even the former president. The former president is the key opponent to these accords. I say he's wrong. He's unequivocally wrong. This is, on the contrary, this is not a deal with impunity. The Farc has committed to tell the truth about everything that happened. And if they're found guilty of war crimes or crimes against humanity, they will be subject to limited punishment, but they're giving up the truth, and if they don't tell the truth, they go to jail.
But he's not the only one who feels that way.
Well, in Colombia, he's the leading proponent. Almost all human rights groups, including the International Criminal Court, saying this meets the standards of international justice. And we've never seen this inside of a peace accord. The Farc, but it's not just the Farc. It's the armed forces. It's the politicians that supported illegal paramilitary groups. It's businessmen who supported illegal, all of those will be subject. If they committed war crimes and crimes against humanity, they will be subject to penalty. But the penalty is tell the truth. And if you tell the truth, then you will get lenient benefits. You'll be confined to basically a space the size of a village for 2 to 3 years. And you must give up all your illegal earnings. The Farc has already handed over a list of all their possessions, all their assets. These assets will go to the victims. That's not impunity. If you understand, justice isn't just putting people in jail. Justice is about, and especially after a conflict, it's about uncovering the truth, repairing the victims, and having some punishment to the perpetrators. All of those ingredients are there. And the way that it was done in Colombia, it's pioneering because they've never done this. The question is, having peace is a good. To get to peace, how much justice? And in Colombia, they put, in my opinion, enough justice to get to peace. And having peace and having no more violence, no more war crimes is good for the society. So when the former president, Alvaro Uribe, says there's impunity, he doesn't understand what justice is about. And he doesn't understand what peace is about. And he is clearly in the minority in this issue.
Well, let's bring this to the ground level and the people of Colombia. Do you think Farc is ready to be a political party? Do you think voters will vote for them and understand what they're trying to do?
Well, I of course, don't know the answer to that. This is the challenge for them. It is not easy to transform from an armed guerrilla movement to a political party. There are different kinds of organizations. In other countries, some have done this successfully. Perhaps the best example is the FMLN in Salvador, who are now governing the country. Most guerrilla groups don't make that transition successfully. This is the challenge to the Farc. I don't know if they'll be able to do it. The way the accords are designed, they will have assistance for a few election cycles. So they will be given 10 seats in Congress for 2 election cycles. And there's also extra seats in Congress, 16 seats for victims in the conflict zones. They will have special seats for 2 election cycles. After that, everyone's on their own. And so the agreements aren't forcing the Farc to become a party and be a successful party immediately, but they have 4 to 6 years to establish their presence in the political arena and win votes and act like a party or not. And that's their challenge.
And it's not just politics, as we know. These former guerrillas will integrate into society. So will Colombians be able to accept them, stand side by side with them in the workforce, in society? Will they be able to be neighbors?
Well, that in Colombia is, perhaps you know, that's been in the past when armed groups have integrated in society, there's been a lot of difficulty. There's been stigmatization, there's been rejection, and so forth. These accords are designed a little differently. And I'm not sure how this will play out, but the Farc handed in all their arms, but they say they don't want to demobilize. And what they mean by that is they want to keep the structure of the organization without arms. They want to be a political organization, a social movement, and they want to have productive activities. And so they want to continue to live almost collectively, but without arms. If they do that, that will change the equation of this previous idea is you leave the armed groups and you go into the cities and you get an education, you get a job, and you just... They're trying to maintain their presence, and particularly in the areas where they've had a long history, and keep the Farc together. There's an example. The government of Cuba, who hosted the peace talks, gave 1,000 scholarships to former Farc fighters, now ex-fighters, to study medicine in Cuba. And they were just selected. And you can see universities throughout the country going to the zones where the Farc fighters are, the former Farc fighters, now civilians, now returning to their original names in most cases, because they had nom de guerres. And they're going through courses. There's a group that just went through the Javeriana University, a Jesuit university in Cali, that just took a course and just got a degree. Some will be trained to be bodyguards for the politicians, those who are in Congress. And a group of something like 300 were specially trained by the Colombian police to be the bodyguards for the FARC politicians. So they're thinking about this a little differently. The advantage of this peace process is that they were able to see what was done in other cases, what was done in Salvador, what was done in Guatemala, what was done in South Africa, and learn from those experiences. And so understanding the difficulties in other places, understanding the difficulties in other peace processes inside Colombia, many issues have been addressed. Now again, everything changes once the implementation begins, and the implementation is beginning, and there's a lot of uncertainty, and the biggest uncertainty you brought up at the outset. We're in election year, we're going through an election campaign, there'll be a new president in 1 year, and so there's much uncertainty.
And time will tell. Professor Marc Chernick, thank you so much for joining us on America's Now.
My pleasure, thank you.
America's Now